Live from the Leap Academy studios, this is Tuesdays with Schwartz, the podcast all about success stories and how you can use those stories to succeed in the 21st century. Every Tuesday, I will talk about one success story, then break it down for you and give you tips and free resources you can use to start your own success journey. If you're new to the podcast, welcome. Hi, my name is The School Doc. If you don't know me, I'm a 21st century skills expert. I'm also a recognized K-12 expert. And my groundbreaking book, Disrupting Education, which describes how to fix the K-12 system. If you want to read it, order your copy on Amazon right now, Disrupting Education. This week, we're going to look at Joe Rogan's success story. For those that don't know, Joe Rogan is a stand-up comedian who also hosts the most popular podcast on the planet and inked a deal worth over $200 million with Spotify. Yes, $200 million to host the podcast. So I'm excited to dive into this success journey. Where does Joe Rogan's story begin? Joe Rogan was born in Newark, New Jersey, but after his parents divorced, he moved to Newton, Massachusetts, and attended Newton South High School. Joe has stated multiple times that he was not a very good student in school, so after he graduated, he got into martial arts and started competing in martial arts tournaments. When he wasn't fighting, he was working as a stand-up comic, trying to hone his craft for telling jokes. At the time, the path to stardom for comedians was to get on TV, so Joe started to audition for roles and was cast as a baseball player in a short-lived TV series called Hardball in 1994. After that series ended, Joe landed the role of a lifetime as the goofy tech guy in the hit TV show called News Radio, which starred the late Phil Hartman, Dave Foley of Kids in the Hall fame, Stephen Root from Office Space, Laura Tierney, and comedian Andy Dick. Even though that show did last more than 4 seasons, the role made Joe a recognizable actor. It's at this point that things start to really break for Joe. While News Radio wraps in production in 1999, Joe still yearns to be a stand-up comedian, so he ends up going to the Comedy Store in Los Angeles to practice his stand-up relentlessly. Over the next few years, Joe goes from being unemployed to having 3 jobs. In 2001, he lands the worldwide hit reality TV show Fear Factor. In 2002, he broadcasts his first UFC fight. And then in 2005, Joe famously calls out comedian Carlos Mencia for stealing jokes from other comedians and trying to pass them off as his own. If you were to pause Joe's life at this moment in 2005, he has already reached his dreams, but things weren't great for Joe. And that's because he hated doing the Fear Factor show. He has discussed this many times on his podcast that the money was great and set him up for life, but that work was horrible. He said he hated getting up in the morning. When Fear Factor finally ended in 2012, Joe was finally free. He had the financial resources to do what he wanted to do, but he didn't know what that was. On the one hand, he wanted to be a stand-up comic, but unless you go on tour, comics can't make any money. And Joe married his longtime girlfriend in 2009, so at this point in his life, he needed to think more about his family than himself. So let's pause in the Joe Rogan story in the year 2009 for 1 second. This was a pivotal moment in Joe's life, and I want you to start thinking about pivotal moments in your life. In 2009, Joe's the host of the most popular reality TV show, Fear Factor. He is doing stand-up when he can at the Comedy Store, and he is also broadcasting UFC fights. That's on the work side. On the family side, Joe and his new wife have a 1-year-old baby. On the one hand, Joe hates his day job, but it pays him so well that he will be set for the rest of his life. On the other hand, if he quit, would that be the dumbest decision he could ever make, given the fact that he has a wife and a baby to take care of? What would you do? The reason I started this podcast and the reason I get up in the morning is because I am sick and tired of how pathetic our school system really is. Instead of our teachers in schools helping kids follow their dreams, they are force-feeding algebra and Shakespeare down their throats. And it's not just unfun, it's torture. I spent 20 years inside the K-12 system, but I was not like any teacher, principal, or superintendent you have ever met before. And that's because I didn't just log in my time like millions of educators do. I don't just have 20 years punched in and punched out. Every single day, I was researching and testing to see how to fix the K-12 system once and for all. And then in 2011, I discovered the key to unlocking kids' potential and fixing the school system for good. And that's why I started this podcast and why I share these stories with you and break them down. As we look at Joe Rogan's life, I want you to picture yourself on a path. It can be a quiet path or a tree-lined path on your favorite street in your hometown. The key is to see a path in front of you step by step. That's the key. You need to keep moving forward. In 2009, Joe Rogan had walked himself to this point in his journey. He had a really well-paying job, but he hated doing it. For fun, he was doing stand-up comedy and UFC fights. But Joe knew that wasn't his career path. He didn't want to always be on tour and away from his family. That was not his path in life. Do you know your path? If you do, I want you to write it down on a piece of paper right now. So let's continue the Joe success journey. Now, what most people don't know is that Joe hired a guy named Brian Redban to videotape Joe's stand-up comedy. At the time, the most popular comedian on earth was Dane Cook, and he had become super popular because he was videotaping everything he did and sharing it with his millions of fans online. So Joe and every other comedian was copying Dane Cook's model for success. But Joe wanted to do something from home. Instead of going to the comedy clubs, why not just create content at home? So Joe asked Brian to set up a live stream for him. And on December 24, 2009, Joe Rogan and Brian Redban broadcast the first ever episode of the Joe Rogan Experience. If you've never seen this episode, trust me, it doesn't look anything like the show today. In fact, it looks like two college kids who got a webcam for Christmas and just are fooling around for a couple hours. That first episode is not worth $200 million, but that's not the point. Joe started an idea. To date, the JRE podcast has broadcast 2,270 episodes. Okay, so 2,270 episodes starting in December of 2009. Joe's first ever guest was friend and comedian Ari Shaffir, who joined him in episode 3 in January 2010. Do you see the path now for Joe's life? Every day, all that Joe did was wake up, love his family, and then go do one episode of the Joe Rogan podcast. And that's it. What path do you want to follow? So here are my school doc tips. What can we learn from Joe Rogan's story? In last week's episode, I talked about the fundamentals of the 21st century. So let me repeat those again for you. 1, you need to know how the 21st century works. 2, you need to know the rules of the 21st century. And 3, you need to know the success playbook. So how do those 3 things apply to Joe's journey? 1, Joe saw that Dane Cook was the most popular comedian because he was broadcasting online to his loyal fans. 2, Joe knew that he needed to learn how to reach his audience online. And 3, Joe needed a platform he could do every single day that would achieve his dreams. And that's it. Yes, it's that simple. Of course, Joe did a lot of work. Of course, Joe didn't become the $200 million man overnight. The first episode of the JRE podcast was on Christmas Eve 2009, and Joe didn't sign his Spotify agreement until 2020. That's 11 years of hard work. That's 11 years of dedication and walking the path one step at a time. That's the rhythm you need to get into. What can you do one step at a time to build something bigger? My path is to fix the K-12 system. That's what I walk every single day. When I wake up in the morning, I am thinking about what's one more thing I can do to fix the system. I want you to start thinking this way. What is your path? What can you do every day to go one step further on that path? I left the K-12 system at the end of the 2020 school year. Just like Joe, I didn't know what I was going to do once that job and career ended. But I took one step at a time, starting with building 4 social media channels, then building a personal brand, then starting this weekly podcast, then launching the online school Leaf Academy, then writing and publishing my book, Disrupting Education, and I just finished recording my first big guest appearance on a big podcast called Disrupt Ed with Dr. Ron Stefanski and Dr. Caesar Mickens. And now I'm working on converting my teacher prep training program into an online teacher university. Find your path and keep moving forward one step at a time. What will happen is eventually you are going to hit a tipping point. I'm not there yet, but I can see the top of the mountain. Can you see the tipping point on your path? Before I share my final thoughts, I want to remind you of all the help that I can give you right now. I created a free newsletter that you can subscribe to, which will not only email you new articles that I write that help you create the success journey, but you will also receive an email with a link to this podcast so you will never miss another episode. What makes the 21st century so amazing is that you can use technology to make things easier for people. So signing up for the newsletter is easy. And once you do, you're going to get emails in your inbox of articles plus every single episode of this podcast. It's so simple and it's free. And if you want to start your learning path, you can also head over to leafacademy.org and click on the free resources tab. There are free webinars, blog posts, and activity worksheets that can help you build a successful life. I'm working on paid educational programs, but like I said, one step at a time. Now, here are my final thoughts. If you're trying to use social media to either build a business or build a personal brand, then you know the hardest thing is to try and grow your audience, getting more followers and growing awareness. The JRE podcast is worth over $200 million because it has a huge audience. But how do people follow you? Like, why should they follow you? I built 4 social media channels from scratch. I started with 0 followers on each channel. I had 0 social media experience and I'd never made a tweet or a post in my life. But the key to gaining followers is creating a reason to follow. Based on the data, this podcast has 130 listeners right now. A few hundred more have listened to clips on YouTube Shorts. If you add all those people up, that's a few hundred people who are listening every single week. And I started from 0. Stop trying to run before you walk. Take it one step at a time. I've been broadcasting this podcast for 3 straight years. For the last 3 years, I had a sum total of 10 people listening. And then in the last few weeks, that number has grown to several hundred. Why? Because I took it one step at a time. Yes, it's frustrating. Yes, it's demoralizing to put your heart and soul into a podcast episode and no one listens, but I'm not doing it for the numbers. I'm doing this podcast because it matters. There is no one else in the world teaching people how to be successful. I have no get-rich-quick scheme. I have no slick marketing. If you visit leafacademy.org, you will see one of the most basic websites ever created. People are finding me because my content is gold. If you want to unlock your full potential, you should follow me. I researched and developed the world's first 21st century skills curriculum, and then I used that curriculum to teach my high school students how to be smarter than Harvard graduates. I researched and developed the world's most effective teacher training prep program, and I've used that program with nearly 5,000 teachers, and we beat the teacher burnout curve, which says 38% of all new teachers quit before the end of their 3rd year. Not one of the 5,000 teachers has quit since 2009. I'm not doing this podcast for the likes. I didn't build 4 social media channels for the follows. I have a path, and my path is to fix the K-12 system. And every day I think about one more thing I can do to walk one step further on that path. That's what I want you to start doing. Stop looking ahead. Stop worrying about the end goal. All you need to know is where you want to go, and then walk the path one step every single day. Joe Rogan started his podcast in 2009, and every day he said, "Who can I interview for a new episode?" At some point, people started contacting him to be a guest on the show. He didn't plan that to happen. It just happened. And it happened because he was going to make an episode every single day, no matter what. That's what you need, clarity of purpose. You have to do what you need to do every single day because you have a path to follow. I want to thank everyone for listening to the Tuesdays with Schwartz podcast. Please sign up for the free newsletter so you can receive amazing emails from me as well as a link to the new episodes every week of this podcast. Thank you for listening. This is your host, The School Doc, and I'll see you next week.
Every now and then you lose in life. What you're risking when you roll the dice. Now I'm gonna place the bet